The world is holding its breath, because what's happening off the coast of Venezuela could ignite a fire that spreads across all of South America. Right now, Nicolas Maduro is facing the greatest challenge to his grip on power since the day he replaced Hugo Chavez. On the surface, this story looks simple. The United States sends warships into the Caribbean, Maduro responds by mobilizing his navy and drones, and the two sides exchange threats. That's how the mainstream media frames it, another authoritarian strongman standing up to Washington's pressure. But if you dig deeper, the reality is far more complex, far more dangerous, and far more revealing about the true balance of power in the Americas. Maduro is a man hated by many inside Venezuela, accused of running a criminal network out of Caracas. His closest allies are Russia, Cuba, China, and Iran, countries long seen as adversaries by Washington. Under his regime, almost 8 million Venezuelans have fled the country, creating one of the largest refugee crises in modern history. To most observers, these facts alone paint him as a dictator clinging desperately to power. And that's why the narrative of a humanitarian invasion has quietly surfaced in some corners of Washington. The idea that removing Maduro could bring democracy, stability, and prosperity back to Venezuela. But here's what they don't tell you. A so-called humanitarian intervention rarely ends with democracy. It ends with geopolitical chess moves, corporate profits, and people caught in the crossfire. If history has taught us anything, from Iraq to Libya to countless proxy wars during the Cold War, it's that invasions justified on humanitarian grounds often leave behind instability, civil conflict, and suffering that lasts for generations. So, is Venezuela next on that list, or is this all just psychological warfare? Washington testing Maduro's nerves, seeing how far he'll go before he breaks? Let's break it down. The United States has a long and complicated history of intervention in Latin America. From the CIA-backed coups in Chile and Guatemala, to the invasions of Grenada and Panama, to the decades-long embargo against Cuba, Washington has always considered the Western Hemisphere its sphere of influence. The Monroe Doctrine may be 2 centuries old, but its logic still drives U.S. foreign policy. No rival powers are allowed to set up camp in the Americas. And right now, with Russia, China, and Iran tightening their ties with Venezuela, Maduro has turned his country into a thorn in Washington's side. That's why the U.S. Navy's presence off Venezuela's coast is more than just routine patrols. It's a message, a warning shot, a way of saying, we see your alliances, we see your weapons, and we're watching every move you make. Maduro, of course, has no choice but to respond. He cannot appear weak, not to his own people, not to the generals who keep him in power, and certainly not to Washington. So he sends ships and drones to patrol the coastline. He declares he's ready to fight. He tries to project strength. But the truth is, Venezuela's military is no match for the Pentagon. Everyone knows it, including Maduro himself. So why is he doing this? Because, for Maduro, survival isn't just about politics. It's about his life, his freedom, and his fortune. The moment he loses power, he risks prosecution for crimes tied to drug trafficking, corruption, and human rights abuses. He also risks losing the billions his regime controls through shadowy networks that stretch across the region. For him, staying in power is staying alive. But here's the dangerous twist. When leaders are cornered, they often become unpredictable. Think about Saddam Hussein in 1990 when he invaded Kuwait, gambling that Washington wouldn't respond. Think about Slobodan Milosevic, clinging to power even as NATO bombs rained down on Belgrade. Think about Gaddafi in Libya, fighting to the bitter end. When dictators believe their downfall means their death, they tend to fight harder, even if the odds are hopeless. That's the situation with Maduro today. Meanwhile, Washington faces its own dilemmas. On the one hand, allowing Maduro to cozy up with America's rivals undermines U.S. credibility in the region. On the other, launching an actual invasion risks destabilizing South America, creating refugee waves, economic chaos, and a political backlash from countries already wary of U.S. interventionism. Remember, Latin America has not forgotten its history. From Chile to Argentina, from Nicaragua to El Salvador, scars from past U.S. meddling still run deep. And then there's the question of oil. Venezuela sits on the largest proven oil reserves in the world. For decades, that resource was both its blessing and its curse. Chavez used it to bankroll his socialist revolution, while Washington eyed it as a strategic prize. Even today, with oil markets shifting and renewable energy on the rise, Venezuela's crude remains a coveted asset. Could it be that beneath all the talk of democracy and human rights, oil is once again driving the game? Let's not forget another layer: migration. Nearly 8 million Venezuelans have already fled their country, escaping poverty, repression, and collapse. They've settled in Colombia, Brazil, Peru, Chile, and beyond. Their presence is reshaping societies across South America. If a conflict erupts, that number could skyrocket, pushing fragile neighbors into political crisis. For Washington, that's another calculation. Can it afford to trigger a refugee wave that destabilizes its allies? Or does it gamble that toppling Maduro will somehow stop the bleeding? But here's where the story gets even darker. Maduro's alliances with Russia, China, and Iran are not just symbolic. They bring real risks. Russian mercenaries and military advisors, Chinese investments in surveillance technology, Iranian oil shipments and security cooperation. All of this ties Venezuela into a web of global confrontation. Chinese investments and surveillance technology, Iranian oil shipments and security cooperation. All of this ties Venezuela into a web of global confrontation. Any move against Caracas risks provoking responses from these powers. And in today's world, with the war in Ukraine still raging and tensions with China growing in the Pacific, the last thing Washington needs is another front in Latin America. So, what are we really watching here? A high-stakes poker game. The US sends ships, Maduro sends drones. Each side waits to see who blinks first. But beneath the surface, the consequences are enormous. If war breaks out, it could reshape the stability of South America for years to come. And the mainstream media, they'll tell you, this is just about a dictator refusing to step aside. They'll frame it as a moral clash, democracy versus tyranny. But history teaches us to be skeptical. Whose democracy? Whose freedom? And who really benefits when regimes fall? Let's think back to Iraq. In 2003, we were told that removing Saddam would bring liberation. Instead, it unleashed chaos, sectarian war, and the rise of ISIS. Or Libya in 2011, when NATO promised to protect civilians from Gaddafi. Today, Libya is fractured, unstable, and plagued by militias. These interventions were sold as humanitarian missions. They left behind failed states. Could Venezuela become the next chapter in that book? Maduro certainly thinks so. That's why he clings to power, rallying his supporters with fiery speeches about sovereignty, independence, and resistance to imperialism. And to be fair, many Venezuelans, even those who despise him, fear foreign invasion more than they fear his regime. For them, the memory of US interference in Latin America is too raw. They know that when Washington steps in, ordinary people pay the highest price. So where does this leave us? With uncertainty, with danger, with a standoff that could go either way. Maybe Washington is bluffing, using military pressure to push Maduro into concessions. Maybe Maduro is bluffing too, pretending he's ready for a fight when he knows he cannot win. Or maybe, just maybe, the bluffs collapse and the region plunges into crisis. For now, what we know is this. The United States is playing mind games with Nicolas Maduro. His reaction will reveal just how secure or how desperate he really is. He says he's ready to fight. He's mobilized ships and drones. He's posturing for survival. But whether he fights for his own life, for Venezuela's drug networks, or for the principle of sovereignty itself, that remains to be seen. And if this turns into a full-scale conflict, it won't just be about Venezuela. It will ripple across South America, destabilizing economies, straining governments, and forcing millions more people to flee. The map of the region could be redrawn in ways we can't even imagine yet. So the question is, are we watching the beginning of a war, or just another round of the endless geopolitical theater between Washington and its enemies? Either way, the stakes are enormous. If you want to dive deeper into this unfolding crisis, check out our recent video covering Venezuela's naval response to US moves in the Caribbean. And if you found this analysis valuable, don't forget to subscribe to The Military Show, where we break down the hidden forces behind today's conflicts. Because what's happening in South America today might just shape the world for years to come. And now, I want to hear from you. Do you think the US is really planning to invade Venezuela, or is this all just a mind game? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and let's talk about it. Stay tuned, stay critical, and we'll see you in the next episode.